Hello and welcome to Referendum TV, and today on the couch I'm joined by Ash Regan-Denham. Got it?
Yep.
Hello and welcome, how are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Ash has got a background as a lobbyist for the Common Weal and has been attending Women for Indie events throughout the Borders area. How's it been?
I think the Borders is quite challenging politically because in a Scottish context you'd probably say it was a bit weird. So there's,
Weird?
Yeah, there's not really, normally in Scotland you've got a big member of lots of people supporting the Labour Party and so on. In the Borders they're not an electoral force at all. So the message, or some of the messaging that they were using in other parts of Scotland, vote for independence, never have a Tory government you didn't vote for again, doesn't really fly in the Borders because obviously that's where we have the only Tory MP, and we've got other, MSPs.
What's his name, Mr. Mundell?
Yes, Mr. Mundell, and then John Lamont as well, so he's an MSP and so on.
Yeah.
So it's quite different. I got the feeling as well it was fairly apathetic. I think being a rural area where there is a bit more.
It was still about 84%, wasn't it? In terms of the overall turnout.
Yes, no, I think, was it 84 or was it 94? I think it might have been in the 90s.
I will defer to you on that.
So, and I think you've got to admire that in the Tories. They really know how to get their vote out. So some of the stories
What's left of it, yeah.
Yes, from the day was, the Tories were bringing out the old folks from the old folks' home and so on, and they were.
We are scone on a string. Come.
And being very unpleasant to my colleagues that were on the polling station. So what they'd been telling them, I don't know, but it didn't seem like it was very positive. Yeah.
So you're a policy wonk, is that fair to say, in your lobbying role for the Common Weal?
Yes.
You're presenting papers and
Absolutely,
lobbying.
yeah.
And you work with the redoubtable Robin McAlpine.
Yes.
I did come across Robin McAlpine at the launch of Elliot Bulmer's book, The Common Weal for something about the Constitution for the Common Good, at the Botanics, and he spoke very passionately, but so quickly.
Yes.
There was a torrent of ideas, and I was trying to chase each one down. It was very difficult to track.
That's Robin, yeah.
Yeah. So do you end up speaking as quickly as him?
Well, that's the funny thing, because in normal life I'm quite chatty and I have a lot to say and quite talkative. But in a room with Robin, I really don't get a word in edgeways. So I just kind of sit there and he talks. We were in a cafe once in Biggar, about 4 or 5 months ago, and a little old lady came up to us at the end of her having her scone, tapped him on the shoulder, and she was like, "Are you not going to let her speak?"
Seriously?
Get a word in edgeways.
He's actually in Biggar, isn't he? He's based in Biggar.
Biggar,
Yeah,
that's right,
I remember that. So that's yeah. So when you actually get to Holyrood, you get a chance to speak to people.
Yes, so it makes kind of refreshing change.
The Common Weal's kind of politically neutral, other than those broader principles, isn't it? How have you thought things have gone in the terms of the referendum?
I think the Common Weal was a great idea. I think in terms of the radical independence and addressing social justice issues in areas like Glasgow and maybe in parts of Edinburgh as well, and probably to an extent in the Borders, although the uptake of these type of ideas in the Borders I think was a bit of a slower start to sort of get these ideas to get some traction. And I think the uptake of it has been brilliant. I think people have really latched onto the idea of the Common Weal. I think the research is excellent, and it's just great to have that facility where you've got economists and various other thinkers that are doing the research on in just a radical way, just completely different from the sort of thing you'd get from the mainstream.
Are they just lending their ideas, or are they funded elsewhere and then they lend their ideas?
Yeah, so they were working for the Jamie Reid Foundation for free, so they were giving their time and writing research papers that we were then using. So we had the research papers online, and then we were producing briefing documents and so on, and trying to also make it more accessible. So writing about things as well for the different websites. So it was the All of Us First website, which was the Common Weal one. We were trying to put things in a more...
Let me get it. I think you're going to have to slow down for me, because I'm not used to it listening as fast. But this is Robin McAlpine territory gears. This, I think it's nothing about us without us. That's one of the quotes I heard fairly regularly. It would be that kind of...
Yeah. So trying to make it accessible to ordinary people, so that it wasn't all policy documents. That, nobody wants to read a 28-page document written by an academic.
Well, not there's other things to do.
Exactly. So you've got to make these things, make the ideas more accessible so that other people can get a handle on what they are.
And this is cross-party, so that's cross the Greens, the SSP, and cross the yes-no divide?
Possibly. Yeah,
so
but obviously it was much more appealing to people who could see these type of ideas being adopted in an independent Scotland. I think some of the ideas probably could be taken forward in Scotland as it is now, but I think it would be much more difficult.
I remember this time last week we had run the 7.5-hour live broadcast from here between 4 of us, which was an experience. And I think at this time I'd begged my son to go for a lie down. I'd gone for a lie down. What were you thinking this time last week when the results came in?
Well, we'd had an amazing experience the night before. So we organised as Yes Scottish Borders was the overarching umbrella, and then we had our individual local groups. So I was involved in Yes Scottish Borders, but I was mainly involved in Yes Gala Shields because that was my local group. And we were quite open and inclusive. And in the end, somebody said, right, let's just organise a rally. We hadn't thought to do it, but because of the way we are, we just immediately sort of got behind it, and it kind of seemed like the perfect thing to do.
This openness to ideas and energy.
Yeah, that people could just go and organise things, and they didn't need to get approval from higher up and so on. And they really just, sort of younger guys, and they really just organised it through Facebook, social media, with 3 days' notice.
Right.
Threw it all together at the last minute. I was one of the speakers that were asked to go along, and we ended up with 700 people in the square in Galashiels, which in a town like Galashiels, is very unusual. I don't know if anything like that's ever happened,
ever.
In recent memory. I can't think that there would have been anything like that. And what an amazing experience, because I think we were all looking at Glasgow and all the amazing things that were happening.
I've just thought border ridings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite a different feel, maybe.
I would imagine, truly, yeah. But that was something.
So I guess we were looking at Glasgow and thinking, oh, it'd be so great to be at a rally or something. So we kind of created that ourselves in Gala, and it was amazing. So we had that. So we were kind of on a high.
Yeah.
Going into it, I'd actually had a little bit of a wobble. I thought all the way along that we would win. And then in the last week, I tried not to watch any of the media. I don't read the papers, and I tried to kind of avoid the front pages and so on, even when I was buying my milk in the local co-op.
Right.
With difficulty. But I just started to get a bit of a wobble. So I kept ringing people up, people that I knew had access to private polling at the SNP, people in different parts of the borders, and saying to them, are we going to win? Are we going to win? And everybody kept saying to me, we're going to win. We're going to win. Private polling's really good. Everything's fine. We're going to win. And I thought, okay, well, these people obviously know more than I do. So you just you go along with it.
But hold on a wee second, right? Because you were based in the borders.
Yes.
Not hardly a hotbed of radicalism.
No, but as it turns out, Galashiels was yes.
Is that right?
We now know, yeah.
So the 700 people in the square was actually...
Yeah, so Galashiels went yes. It was about, if not yes, then it was 50-50. So it was 50-50 or maybe 51 to yes. Selkirk was very good as well. They were pretty much the same. I think most parts of Hoyok as well were very good. Traquair, always liked Traquair. They were yes. And so on. Where we didn't do so well were places like, obviously you'd expect Kelso and Eyemouth and Peebles and Melrose probably. So because we obviously had our own sample data by the end of the count. But when I arrived at the count, I thought we were going to win. I was in great spirits, as were we all.
Right.
And it was a couple of hours in when things started to not look so good, and I actually got a phone call from my mother saying the BBC are calling it for no. And I was sitting at a count where nothing had been counted, and I couldn't understand how they could know that. So it sort of suspended disbelief at that time, and I thought, oh, maybe that's a mistake. But as the evening wore on, obviously, we all then accepted it.
But you were sampling boxes when they were being opened to check.
Yeah.
And you could see there was a welter for no down there, yeah?
Yeah, obviously we were expecting that, so, yeah.
But the margin, were you expecting that margin?
No, we thought we would do better. We actually got 33%, and we'd been hoping for something closer to 40. Maybe 37 or 38, so we were disappointed in that result.
Yeah, we had to hold it high in those areas and then hopefully win elsewhere.
Yeah.
What did you put the loss down to?
I think it's very easy in hindsight to start thinking we could have done this, but obviously there are things we could have done, and we failed to engage the older age group that didn't have access to social media. So possibly we could have done more, in the borders we could have done more with that.
It's funny because the director of the Yes Digital campaign, Stuart Kirkpatrick's also a friend of mine, and he was getting accolades left, right and centre in terms of not him personally, but the Yes Digital campaign, because they were just trouncing in terms of all metrics available, the No campaign.
Yeah.
But as you say, the demographic that delivered was the plus 54.
Yeah, I think over 65s were 71%.
This is based on the Ashcroft poll of 2,000 people, which is, I think, it's the biggest extent so far, but I think the more will follow.
Yeah.
So, what kept them voting no then? What do you think?
Well, I mean, we obviously did street stalls and ran meetings and so on, but I think there's a certain demographic that won't come out to a town hall and sit in a Coles hall and listen to people making political speeches. So I think you have to try and engage people in different ways, and obviously without the backing of any media other than the Sunday Herald, it was very difficult for the Yes campaign to engage
Referendum
with those people.
TV, as we're now broadcasting Scotland, was very pro the Yes vote, and we still are. and whatever follows from that. So just be wary of that.
Yeah.
So, but our reach is not as extensive as some. But
so older people who were relying on the BBC, obviously, and the newspapers were, clearly getting only one side of the debate, and we weren't obviously able to reach enough of them. I mean, we had massive supplies of the Wee Blue Book, so you're probably familiar with that.
Yep.
I think in the Borders we took a delivery of 11,000 of those, and we got rid of them all. So we were standing on street stalls, we were delivering them to people's houses, we were handing them out at meetings, and they were really useful. If you could get people to read it, and they were maybe undecided or even a no, but
so
not
they were teetering.
Yeah.
It was a great convincer.
It definitely helped. Possibly, I mean, I think Reverend Stuart Campbell had said they had to be brought out at the last minute, because people said to me, why haven't we had these earlier, because it was such a great resource. But his argument was that it was only right at the last minute, when people were ready to engage, that they would have read it. And it kind of makes sense. If we'd have been popping these through the doors 4 months out, they would have gone on the whole table in the pile of junk, and then they would have found their way probably into the recycling. Nobody would have read them. But so I think if we ever get to the stage where we have another referendum, we've got to do something about the media. We have to have some alternative way of putting out a different message.
What's your ideas around it?
No idea.
Okay, well, obviously Broadcasting Scotland will be there.
Yeah.
And there are moves afoot elsewhere, I think, to develop.
I'm not sure about newspapers. I mean, because you sort of think that's a declining medium, so maybe we need to be focusing more on TV rather than on
Well, Dead Tree News, as it's now being called, in cooler quarters, so just dropping it in there.
Yeah.
It seems to be on the wane, apart from the Sunday Herald, of course, which you've recorded
114% or something, was it they said?
Oh, split here, used to be an account, 111%.
That's amazing though, isn't it?
It's outstanding. They're just below 50,000, I think. For the Scotland Sunday, it's about 20,000 and declining fairly rapidly, probably because of their editorial line, and a lot of us just won't even look at it or even link to it now because of some of the stories they've been carrying. Can that carry it? Can one Sunday paper carry the movement?
No, I don't think so.
So what idea what's the Common Weal's approach, do you think, going forward?
Well, I don't know if you saw, Robin had a piece published in Bella Caledonia.
It was huge.
It was huge. He sent it to me
because Robin, bullet points, mate.
I know, exactly. Obviously, like everybody else, I was devastated on the Friday, and didn't want to leave the house. And
I wasn't devastated, so not like everybody else.
Yeah, I really was. I suppose it's expectation as well. If you think you're going to win, you're obviously going to crash further than if you maybe were thinking, I don't know how it's going to go. So and I emailed him and I said, please say something to make me feel better. And he sent me back the draft for that article. And I read through it and I thought, wow, this is, talk about hit the ground running,
Yeah, boom.
So wipe your tears and get up and do something. So but I think it was good. I think there's a lot of really good stuff in there. But that's in terms of, going around, in terms of the Common Weal, in terms of beefing up, our policy, beefing up the lobbying, certainly doing something around media, making sure that we've got, we can get, I think they were doing fairly well. They were getting pieces into the Sunday Herald and the regular Herald, but doing more around that. But I think in terms of the media, getting a fair hearing for ideas like the 4-day week or universal benefits, the citizen's income and so on, these ideas, there's no sort of space to debate these ideas properly if you're going to just be monitored by the Daily Mail. So there needs to be more space for these sort of ideas so we can debate them and decide about whether we can
because there are complex ideas with quite profound
absolutely.
Implications, which actually can't be glossed over in a 10-minute slot. And the beauty of this format is that we can discuss ideas in greater depth, whereas in other places it's soundbite politics. And I'm sure Robin in a 2-minute speech could give 1,000 soundbites, but whether that's then explained effectively to people out there is a different matter. And I suppose that's part of your role at Holyrood to take those ideas further forward. In terms of the way forward and what's happened in the aftermath, the SNP are heading, I think, towards 70,000 members.
Amazing.
Pete Morell's been posting about that quite a lot on Twitter. I think they're at 65, but they're heading north. There'll obviously be a limit at some point. The Greens are now allegedly bigger than the Scottish Labour Party.
Is that right?
In Scotland, according to, Stuart Campbell said that in a tweet or suggested something like that. And the SSP, I think they've got about 2,500 to 3,000 new members.
I think Solidarity have picked up a few new ones as
Absolutely. And Tommy's now back in the SNP for the general election in May.
Yeah, the leader of our, or the chair of our Yes Gala Shields group was actually from Solidarity. So when people were saying, oh yes, it's all SNP, that's not the case.
Right.
So so that was interesting to see that Tommy had backed the SNP for Westminster.
What do you think about that development, that people have gone into the parties after?
Well, I'd never been involved in a political campaign before, so obviously I didn't really have anything to compare it with, but I really enjoyed the fact that you could work alongside socialists.
What enticed you?
I don't know,
Sitting
I
there
just...
drinking cups, making cups of tea, doing the dishes, thinking, looking after your twins, and then suddenly thinking, I know, I'm going to just get...
Well, it just seemed like such a great thing to get involved with, and I'm so glad, even though we didn't win, I'm so glad I was involved in it. I think it was probably the best political campaign to ever be involved in.
Yeah.
You know? So I'm so glad that I was involved in it, and I have great memories to take away with me. But I loved it. I loved working along. I mean, I am a member of the SNP. I haven't been a member for very long. It's coming up for about 2 years, so I'm a fairly new member. But I loved working alongside people that were in the Green Party, the Socialists, people from Solidarity, and so on. I thought it was great, and people of no party. We had a lot of people that were not in a political party.
That's what I am. That's what I say. I'm in no political party.
Yeah, and we had a lot of those, and they were very effective people. They threw themselves into it and did lots of work alongside people that had been on the campaign trail for the SNP for 30 or 40 years, all working together. It was an amazing thing to see, really. I would like to see that continue. I don't know if it's possible for it to continue, but I would like to think maybe it could. We're having a meeting next week for Yes Scottish Borders where we're going to talk about where we go from here.
I think that's what's happening a lot. I know that Business of Scotland have got a meeting, I think probably today or this weekend, and I think National Collective was speaking to Ross Aitchison, and they've got a meeting this weekend as well. I mean, I think they're exhausted because they had Yesterville and they were all over the place. I think everybody, to a certain extent, is exhausted.
Yeah, I think they were. I think they somehow the energy seems to be back.
Yeah, with a vengeance, and it seems as if it's rounding on Labour.
Yes. I mean, I was formerly a member of the Labour Party, but we're going back to the 90s for about a year when I was a student. I think it was 96 or something. My family were all previous. My parents are from Glasgow. A lot of my family still live in the Glasgow area, and we were all, Labour voters.
Right.
So, for me to join the SNP was quite a big thing in itself.
Absolutely.
But I used to really hate the Tories, and I think I'm at the point now where I possibly hate Labour more than the Tories, which for me that's been my life's work, hating the Tories, really.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, at account. So I was trapped in a room as I was watching us lose with a bunch of Tories and Lib Dems who were cheering and punching the air every time another result came in. And we were standing there and we're watching them in the early hours, so 4 or 5 a.m. when the results started to come in quicker.
Yep.
And it was areas, Labour stronghold areas, and we were watching the Tories cheering on victories delivered to them on a plate by the Labour Party.
Say that again. Deliveries delivered on a plate by the Labour Party.
Yeah.
That's quite a powerful statement.
That's bizarre, isn't it? Watching the Tories cheer for victories that the Labour Party have delivered to them. So I don't think there's such a thing as the Scottish Labour Party. I think they're dead to me.
They're dead. They're dead to Ash.
And I think that there's an immense amount of people now that will make it their business to try and eradicate them as a political force in Scotland. I don't know whether it will happen, but I'd like to think that maybe it could happen.
It's certainly moving that way. Edinburgh South is a majority of 316 in favour of Ian Murray at the moment. That's the guy who doesn't like stickers on his doors or his windows.
I think I drove past his constituency office
so no
on the way here.
stickers, but no votes either. So hopefully there'll be a list. But I think somebody's already drawn up a list to target particular seats with direct action.
Was somebody saying that the average is 8,000 votes? So they've got fairly safe seats, a lot of them.
Well,
so
they're safe seats on a 48% turnout.
Yeah.
So on a larger turnout, they could be swayed. So they're not as secure as they once were, and that's for sure. And I think what's interesting for me is I was interviewing Bruce Fumi earlier on, one of 2 Afro-Celtic comedians in Scotland, and prior to that I was interviewing Gerda Stevenson. Do you know Gerda?
I've met her.
She was also Labour. So that's 3 people on the couch previously in Labour, and now absolutely adamant that Labour must be dispersed.
Well, you just feel they've betrayed Scotland, and that can't be allowed to stand.
How would you say they're betrayed?
By side, well, I feel they've sided against. Several Labour politicians not come out and say that even if independence was better for Scotland and the Scottish people, that they would not support it, and that's not good. That's not a good statement to be coming out and saying.
I'm not sure. I don't want to get this wrong, but I think maybe somebody like Jimmy Hood and perhaps Ian Davidson. I'm not sure, so I'll give that caveat.
Yeah. But did you see the footage of the Empire Strikes Back being played at the Labour Party arriving in Glasgow?
Did I see it? It was one of my highlights. This is now me being interviewed, yes. one of my highlights for the whole event was Ash. It was the guy on the tricycle. The guy on the tricycle.
Genius on so many levels.
On so many levels.
Yeah.
He just called it, and the stairs he got.
Yeah.
They were very firm stairs.
And there was literally nothing they could do. There was no way to handle it, and that was the great thing about it. They just couldn't handle the situation. So
and I suppose when you're faced with an overwhelming media, 36 out of 37 papers against us, the broadcasters, though I think STV came out better in that respect, and the BBC were just where they were, just absolutely dire, then it's very difficult to present anything to the general population, effectively, other than using, and we were very skilled in that, as we've both noticed, sort of viral ways of doing that, messages getting out there on Twitter, on Facebook, through Instagram and Vimeo. But it did feel as if there was no way of actually landing a blow.
Yeah. I think the mainstream media entirely missed the Yes campaign at the grassroots level. And it's such a shame that they didn't manage to, I know they were probably doing it on purpose, but it's a shame that none of that managed to be captured. You know, the energy and the, like we're saying, the cross-party. But they did, didn't they? They
didn't choose to write about it, as you say, and that's in part of editorial policy, other than if they could put an angle on it, which was to denigrate it.
Well, we had a couple of times where the media would come and ask us about something that always had to be balanced by something else. So at one point, Yes Gal Shields had organised a meeting where Nicola Sturgeon was on the panel, so obviously that attracted a lot of interest, and I think we had 500 people or something come along to that. But then they couldn't even report about that. They had to then go and report about what Michael Moore was up to, you know, in his meeting with 30 people with grey hair in his meeting. So yeah, it was like chalk and cheese.
There's nothing wrong with people with grey hair. There's people in the studio right now who manifest that
actually,
look.
As it turns out, you know, he was going for his vote, which in the Borders, you know, he did.
Which you brought out, and the interesting payoff for Michael Moore is, along with Tavish Scott from the Shetlands. I was at university with Tavish. They are now on the committee with Lord Smith, with the view to articulating future powers. Which brings us on to the topic of future powers, Ash. What do you reckon? It's a very powerful sigh.
I think...
and another one.
I don't think they will want to give us any more powers. I can't see them.
When we're talking who are we talking?
Well, the establishment. So either the Tories or Labour.
Right.
I'm assuming it'll be another Tory government in May.
Why?
I just don't think Ed Miliband is resonating.
Okay, that's one way to describe it. Could you describe it another way?
And there was that footage. I haven't seen it myself, but I've heard it reported, where, as we were just saying about the Empire Strikes Back march, I think a young mum and her friend took this opportunity to try and interview Ed Miliband with her mobile phone, and just his inability to kind of interact with normal people.
And yet he was extemporising his speech yesterday, whereupon he forgot, or the day before, it was Thursday, I think, whereupon he forgot about the deficit.
And I'm not sure they've judged the mood, even with the Empire Strikes Back. They don't seem to have judged the mood correctly in Scotland. And I think they will lose seats up here as a result of what's gone on during the referendum campaign.
How would you, I mean, I know your mood, because you've conveyed that. How would you characterise the general mood amongst the Yes campaign?
I think down but not out is what I would say. I think a lot of people are ready to... certainly for us in the Borders, I think when I go to the meeting next week, I think what I'm going to suggest, and whether this will be taken forward or not, I don't know, is that we probably should split our focus. So if we can stay together as a cross-party group to support maybe the SNP candidate fighting Michael Moore, I think that would be a good thing. That would be maybe our immediate political aim.
What's the majority there?
Scarily bad. So he got elected on 22,000, and John Lamont was behind him on 19,000, and Paul Wheelhouse stood for that seat in 2010, and he got just under, I think it was about 6,000 he got, so that's massive. So it's probably not doable, but...
Well, no.
However,
yes.
27,300 and something people voted yes in the Borders. The constituency is not exactly the same, so it wouldn't be exactly map onto. But if you could get every single person in that constituency who voted yes out to vote for a Yes Alliance candidate or the SNP candidate or whatever it turns out to be, who knows? It's
possible. I suppose one of the things I was talking to Bruce Fumey about earlier, and one of the points he was emphatic on, is we have to respect democracy. We have to respect the result. We don't necessarily have to respect the process of it, which is the media and the businesses and the BBC's role. But we do actually have to respect the outcome. Hold on a wee second.
But is it democracy if people are making their decision based on the wrong information? I don't know that I'd accept that.
Well, okay. Well, we'll come back to that as a contentious point. How would we go about reaching out to some of the 2 million, but we need about 250,000 to begin to switch towards us? How would we, as a Yes movement, go reaching out to them?
Well, possibly you don't have another referendum straight away, and you maybe, I believe, a sizable number of those people maybe want a Devo Max. Maybe there's a route for maybe pursuing that in an interim period, maybe, and they might feel that's less scary. So rather than, I think some people felt that it was a jump into the unknown, and despite the fact that there were 700 pages, which was the SNP vision, and then you had all these other sort of civil society groups putting forward different visions. The Common Weal had a different vision, the Green Party obviously had a different vision, that they couldn't see that. They weren't able to see it in the way that the Yes supporters could see it, and it was too scary for them. Maybe if you move it incrementally, maybe you take more people with you that way.
Right. I was involved for a little bit with the Constitutional Commission, which is now actually come into play because of what's potentially happening. What you're looking at there, I suppose, is what would be called as much as we can towards home rule.
Yeah.
Bringing the bulk of the stuff that can be done here to here. Do you think that's likely?
No, I don't think that's likely, because if they'd wanted to give us what is effectively Devo Max, they wouldn't have fought so hard to keep that off the ballot paper as an option for the referendum, because they knew that would win.
Do you think David Cameron cares
about losing Scotland?
Yeah.
I do.
Really? Why?
Yeah. Well, for a number of reasons. I think the prestige angle, I think people maybe often overlook that. The fact that it's very difficult to be gadding around the world talking about how great you are when various parts of your territory are desperate to get away from you. It doesn't look very good.
No. Yep.
Obviously need somewhere to park the nukes.
Yes.
Oil revenue, balance of payments, so on. So, yeah.
So 3 good reasons. But then he could go up and glatan Michael Bloomberg and say, it should have been more. It should have been more. Amongst other things, obviously, about talking about purring queens and what have you.
Yes. I'm not. I think Home Rule or Devo Max is good, but when I look at what's happening in the media at the moment with us potentially being drawn into more military action, I mean, for me, that was one of my main reasons for wanting an independent Scotland, was so that we could set our own foreign policy.
And you think that would be more benign?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would hope it would be.
That ties into your background in international development. How would you have seen that going? I know it seems forlorn at the moment, but how would you have seen that going in Indie Scotland?
Well, I'd like to have thought that we would be. I know that people talk about the UK being a force for good, but I dispute that. I don't think we are a force for good internationally. So I would like to have seen an independent Scotland be a force for good. I'd like us to have got involved in peacekeeping, like the Irish and the Danes do. The UN obviously reimburse you for that, and it really increases your sort of your global standing, because obviously the international community like that if you're prepared to do that. So things like that, and small countries can make a difference. There's various pieces of things that you can influence, and international legislation and so on. So I think an independent Scotland could have done. Obviously we wouldn't have been on the P5 and so on, but personally that wasn't an issue for me. I'm not interested in that sort of. Well, it's not defence, is it? It's attack. Let's be honest.
Right.
So I would be more interested in the way that the SNP positioned the Scottish military as a defence force, rather than projecting, military strength around the world.
It would also have to have a role when you do get terrorist states, because I think ISIS or IS or ISIL are definitely that. But I think that's been mismanagement in terms of foreign policy in the first place to arrive at that situation. I suppose right now, I noticed that the Love Bond, there's quite a few historians we were involved in that. Dan Snow, Tom Holland, Simon Sharma, David Starkey. There seems to be a battle right now for the immediate history of the referendum.
Yeah.
And within that, we have the First Minister stepping down.
Yeah.
And you, as a woman, have a slightly different perspective on that, I would imagine, because a lot of commentary suggested that in terms of women and in terms of the Ashcroft vote, there was a 10% deficit in between men and women for voting for yes. So what impact do you think Alex Salmond's resignation will have, and how do you think it'll be portrayed? How do you think the Yes campaign will be portrayed historically? And these are two nice, easy questions for Ash here.
I'm not sure that, because Alex Salmond was painted as being, that women didn't like him and so on. I'm not sure that.
Moira does.
Well, the data for that, I mean, was there data on that? I'm not entirely sure.
There was a suggestion in the Ashcroft poll that there was a deficit of 10%, so 54% women voted for no, and 40 for whatever the balance is, 46 voted.
So that means we weren't able to convince them of the benefits of an independent Scotland, but doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't very keen on Salmond himself. I mean, I believe that he has he not got the highest approval ratings of any politician in Europe or something?
Something
and that's
ridiculous
after,
like that, yeah.
You know, a long spell in office, which obviously normally they would go the other way. So I've never met him, so I couldn't really say either way. I have met Nicola, and I was, you know, very impressed with her. I think she's a very good politician. So I don't know whether she will go on to be the new First Minister. But I think
it's looking very likely.
Yeah,
at this stage.
and isn't that quite amazing to have three in the Scottish political scene, to have three, you know, the leaders of all the three main parties are all women.
So are Women for India redundant then? Given that what's that we're saying?
Well,
75% of the leaders at Holyrood are going to be females. I mean, that seems to me.
But the seats are not. So I think the representation in Holyrood is something like 34% are women. So that's still quite low.
Right.
Not as low as Westminster, where I think it's something like 23%. And I think it's even lower for MEPs and for councillors. So I think there's still quite a bit of work to be done in terms of getting women's representation.
So let's put that hat on. The women. This is now the Women for India hat that you're wearing. Speak from there in terms of what can be done.
Well, we don't have a membership. You know, you don't have to sign up and pay a membership fee like, say, you would do to maybe join the SNP or whatever at the moment with the Women for India.
£12, and they've made about 385,000 since Alex decided to stand down.
So Women for India don't have anything like that at the moment. But what we have had is a 40% increase in wanting to go on like our mailing list or to sort of join up.
Right.
So
how would one? Let's advertise this.
Yeah.
How would one go about doing that? You want to speak to the cameras here?
I think you would just get in contact through the website.
Okay. So womenforindia.
I think it's womenforindependence.org.
Yeah, womenforindependence.org. You can go there and get information how to join up with their mailing list and attend some events and be of some assistance.
So we've got a conference coming up on the 4th of October in Perth.
1,000 women in Perth. Bruce Fumi's from Perth, and Bruce is quite happy to personally greet you all when you arrive there. So he was saying that this morning.
So I guess the point with that is there's still an immense appetite of women to be involved.
And it happens so rapidly.
Yes, and for women to obviously have a voice going forward as well. So at the conference, I guess we will then have to decide where we see our role, you know, what do we want to achieve, what are we going to be doing. And I think there's definitely some interest in having women's voices heard in terms of what the more powers might be. Because if the UK establishment want to engage with Scotland and civil society Scotland and not just with some politicians in a room, which they've said they do, but I don't know if they actually do. So we'll see if that actually
when you say British establishment, what do you mean?
Well, whoever's in charge after May.
Right.
So we'll see.
But you think it's going to be the Tories?
I think it might be, yeah.
And would they have any interest other than trying to reduce Labour here further and reduce them to...
Well, they've said there's supposed to be, you know, a timetable for more powers. So they vowed, didn't they? It was on the front of the Daily Record.
I think that's Burns Day, the delivery is due, which is about 4 months away.
Yeah. So hopefully, you know, Women for Independence would be able to maybe have some input into that process. I think that would be a good thing.
Would that be, what would they be looking for? Would they be looking for issues around representation or female-only shortlists? Or?
I'm not sure. We haven't sort of put anything into, you know, we haven't got anything written down as yet, but I imagine that kind of will go through a process and we'll come out the end of it with obviously some sort of ideas on how we want to progress.
Now, this is only because I think you can manage it, right? I want to ask you to put two hats on, right? So put the Common Weal hat and the Women for India hat. What's the crossovers there?
Yeah. Well, I think they did some interesting things. So in the run-up to the referendum, yes, sort of HQ obviously got to a point where they didn't know who the key and sort of important players were in kind of the Scottish regions, because it kind of just went away from them and it just took on a life of its own. And so when the media, the mainstream media, were looking for commentators or different people, they would go to Yes, and so you got kind of the same people going on the media.
Right.
So, you know, Blair Jenkins and mainly politicians is what it turned out to be. But obviously through groups like, you know, Business for Scotland...
Name them all. There's 350 of them, I'm only joking.
So, well, Business for Scotland, I think, were a key player.
Yep.
Women for India, obviously, were another key player. I would say the Common Weal definitely was a key player as well. So if you take those groups, they actually set up a media briefing, I think every day at 11 for a couple of weeks before the referendum.
And with Rick, that was in Glasgow.
All together, with Rick, all together, to sort of say, look, here's some alternative voices, here's some different people to speak to and hear from. And I think that was quite successful in terms of getting media coverage. So,
yeah, there's one character within Women for India who I absolutely adore, is Selman Raman. or Raymond.
Right.
She managed to inveigle herself into 2 or 3 TV situations and spoke in each one. So it was like this, insurgency. It was a one-woman insurgency. Fantastic. So in terms of how Women for Indy progress, we're not sure. Will they change their name, or will they retain the name, or will they change it to something?
I'm not sure.
No, again.
I think they may keep it.
Yeah.
Because it was Women for Independence, Independence for Women. So they could maybe use the latter part.
Can I ask, because and I missed this with Gerda yesterday, which is, I mentioned it cheekily earlier on about you making cups of tea. How was that advert for you? For me, it was one of the most outstanding errors of the campaign.
Yeah, I think that poor actress is going to live on in classrooms around the country, if not the world, in terms of what not to do in a political campaign. Yeah.
What was your immediate reaction?
I found it very difficult to watch, just even for the first few seconds, as it was so ponderous and slow, and it just seemed. Who made it? Do we know who made it? It wasn't Saatchi that made that, was it?
It was.
Was it?
Yeah.
Good grief. It looked like they hadn't spent very much money on it, and maybe they did, but it didn't look like that. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on advertising or anything like that, but it was.
But you are an expert on being a woman, so.
It was really hard to watch, and I spoke to one of my friends who was undecided, and really only made her mind up in the last week. And obviously, as somebody who was friends with me, she was getting a lot of this from me for months before, but managed to resist it and she watched the advert, and she said that out of all the things that she'd sort of read and watched, that she said it was described it as hideous, and it had pushed her towards yes. So I don't know if that was sort of played out across the country or not.
As you were talking there, I was wondering if there's a minute taker at a Common Weal meeting. It must be the fastest minute takers ever. If they had to do a verbatim, they'd just put their hand and be like, it's remarkable, because you're saying you're talking to friends and what have you.
Yeah.
Are you encouraged to progress in this? You personally, are you encouraged to stay with Common Weal, stay with Women for Indy?
I think so. I'm not sure, there's only so much one person can do, so probably you'd have to pick one. So if I didn't finish what I was saying earlier about if we had a sort of a political...
Did I interrupt you?
No, I think I just got lost in my train of thought. So if we're saying that maybe we could have a cross-party, I'm not saying this could work, but maybe if Yes Borders could carry on and try and get somebody elected as a sort of an immediate political goal, but we could also have community goals, and I'd like to see us maybe do something for the community, and we could all work together, because I think you've got to keep the momentum going and work together. We've got an amazing organisation set up with all these people that have been involved through the different organisations, through Yes Grassroots, and a lot of that only came together at quite near the end in the last few months.
That's an interesting point.
So I think we really should keep that, because if we ever do get to the position where we have another referendum, and let's say it was in the short term rather than maybe in 15 years' time or something, then having that in place would be an amazing advantage. You would go really... You'd be running, you'd start off, at an amazing speed. So yeah, absolutely.
In that organic growth, we talked earlier on about Wings for Scotland's Wee Blue Book, and you said it was appropriate to have it at the later stages of the campaign. But the grouping started to coalesce at the latter stages of the campaign as well. But they're not really going to fully bear fruit for some time, are they? Because they're only the networking, getting to know people. It takes time.
It does. It takes time to build that. It takes time to get organised. I think we could probably learn some lessons about how we used our data.
Go on.
I feel like...
What data?
Well, you know that the activists were using a system through
10 points.
Yes, called YesMo.
Right.
So that was our database, and I just feel it probably wasn't as useful. Didn't have as much utility as it probably could have had. So
what was wrong with it? So was this the scale? How strong?
Yeah, well, that was what the question you asked on the doorstep, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. But I just think in terms of maybe keeping track of who your activists were, how much work they'd personally done. Maybe you could be linking in, if you had activists that were very influential on Twitter, for instance, then you would know exactly who they were. So you could then contact them and say, right, we want to put out this, and they could do that for you, and so on. So I think there is a lot more...
I think that was kind of done to a certain extent. I think you got knocked up on Facebook.
But not part of one big system. There was a lot of duplication, and there was a lot of things. Yes, there was a lot of stuff getting lost. Somebody would have a list. Somebody would think that someone else had that. I just think it could have been better.
How do we bribe Middle Scotland if there is such a place?
I don't know. My husband and I were talking about that. He's English, and obviously went through the process to come around to a yes vote. And
what was that process?
It was very long. It was a very long process. It took me about a year to convince him. Yeah. Well, because people say, "Oh, I don't know how you can be married to someone," and they could be, I know, but you can't talk about it 24/7. You can't sit down every day and say, "Right, so we're going to discuss this." You know, you just can't do that.
That's if you want to eat.
No, exactly. So you've got to just drip feed a little bit here, a little bit there, and go, "Oh, did you see this? Have you seen this?" You know,
let's stay with him because my partner's English and my stepson's English. We've both recently joined parties.
Yes,
SSP,
he's just joined the SNP as well.
SSP and Greens, they joined.
Yeah.
What was the clincher and convincer for? Can we name this chap? What's his name?
Rob. I don't think there was any one thing. I think it was the weight of the, you know, a large amount of evidence. I think he, you know, really wanted to have it proved to him about the numbers and, you know, and so on. And I think once it was, I think he, you know, it became obvious to him that was the right way to go. And
did you do the proving?
Well, no, I just kind of linked, you know, and said, look at this, read this, look at this article, have you watched this little clip, and you know.
Do you know, it's funny, because Colin Fox amazed me when he said to me that he was quite happy to campaign for another 2 years.
Right.
Because he is a dyed-in-the-wool activist, he loves doing it, that's what he does. But Jim Sillars said he's not going to retire, because he's determined to go. This was 2 weeks ago. So he was determined to carry on. He was off the idea of pushing for a mandate. We'll come on to that shortly. Yesterday with Gerda and today with Bruce and now with you, there's just, when you beat somebody, you've got to defeat them.
Yeah, we're not defeated, are we?
It doesn't remotely.
No, we're not. Actually, I was on panels with Jim Sillars,
right,
and with Colin Fox several times actually, and that's the amazing thing about Women for Indie, because I was a nobody, you know, I'm just somebody that wanted to get involved, and I would.
Can I just clarify there? Ash did not have a public profile,
no,
but she's always been a somebody.
Not at all. And so for me to be sitting on panels next to people like Jim Sillars, you know, you're like pinching yourself, thinking, how did I get here? But that's the amazing thing about Women for Indie. Had they not formed and given a place where people could go that were put, because obviously there was hundreds of groups across the country that were putting on meetings and wanted to make sure they had, maybe not a gender balance, because most of the times there wasn't 2 men and 2 women. Most often it would be 2 to 1 or something like that. To give them a focus and, you know, contact and say, you know, I'm doing a meeting in Annan, I'm doing a meeting in Eyemouth or in Galashiels, I need a woman to go on the panel, and they were able to provide that all over Scotland, and that in itself is an amazing achievement.
Which is how you reached us today.
Yes, to give a voice to women all over Scotland, and that, you know, there should be a legacy in that.
I think there will be, because you've got a strength of purpose about you that's formidable. That, you know, I think when it's focused and galvanised going forward with the meeting this weekend, then that does give a platform to push on it. I suppose the agreement that's emerging is back the SNP in the general election, though vote tactically to make sure that the Lib Dems and Tories don't get in either.
Yeah.
So to the extent that's possible, but thereafter, the 3 parties for Indie, SSP, the Green Party and the SNP, then vote for who you want at that stage.
Yeah.
That's what makes sense. I mean,
it does. Yeah. Because obviously the smaller parties have got more chance through the proportional representation system that they use at Holyrood, so it just gives them a much more opportunity. So yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. It seems to be, I'm not sure if you could say it's a consensus, but that's, obviously it's only really a week. Yeah. So maybe new things will emerge, but that seems to be where.
But these are nascent ideas that may in time become part of the mainstream.
It's only 8 months, isn't it, till the general election? So it's
222 days or 221 and a half days now. I've got it written down somewhere. I've got it on my phone, so it just flips up every day. Yeah. Because I'm very keen on that. I'm looking forward to that. And
are you?
Broadcasting Scotland will be absolutely on that, and we will be doing a live broadcast on that evening with a degree of glee in our eyes, because we'll be looking at some form of revenge.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm interested in that, so I'm interested in getting into politics. This has sort of piqued my interest in terms of going forward. So, I might put my name forward for that.
You're going to have a rest?
Probably not.
No. What is the qualifications at Common Weal? Come in, you've got to have this super duper charged battery that goes on forever.
I think that might be it, yeah.
Yeah? And people that have emerged to prominence in this process, I mentioned Selma was one of my favourites just because of her infiltration skills, but also Robin McAlpine, my experience of him at the Botanics, where we launched the book about the common good, the Constitution for the Common Good. It was amazing. I've got him actually on YouTube on my phone. 4 minutes he talked. Yeah. And it was a book. It was a book in 4 minutes. It was just formidable. So he's one of the vibrant personalities that's emerged, and I hitherto hadn't known very much about. People like Selma, and you mentioned Business for Scotland. We've received a lot of kudos from people I've spoken to. Who else jumps out for you?
Leslie Riddoch, I think. I don't know, so I'd kind of missed her from our broadcasting days, so I wasn't immediately kind of familiar with who she was when I first sort of got interested in the referendum, in 2012 or whatever, because I've lived in England for quite a long time, so
Where did you live?
I moved to Devon when I was 10,
right,
and then went to university in the Midlands, and then went to live in London for a while, and then moved from London back to Scotland about sort of 10 or 11 years ago.
Yeah.
So some elements of the Scottish political scene had kind of passed me by to an extent until I sort of became interested in it. And I really enjoyed her book on Blossom, and obviously she did the same thing with a speaking tour going over all over Scotland. Yeah,
she was absolutely everywhere.
And I think a lot of her ideas were very interesting. I think I watched her event. She did one in Melrose, which obviously is quite conservative type of area, and I'm not sure if a Colin Fox, Jim Sillars type meeting probably wouldn't have done so well in that type of area. But a lot of people turned out to listen to what she had to say. It wasn't an overt vote yes, independence is a very soft sell, but for some people, that really worked. Just open the mind to what, how they do things in other countries, and why Scotland couldn't be a bit more like that, in terms of, you've probably heard some of the things she's saying about, in Norway they have all these huts, and it's quite normal for people from the cities to go to the countryside at the weekends. We just don't have anything like that in Scotland. We just don't live outside. We're so indoorsy.
There's a function of land ownership in that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And Common Weal's got some policies around
that.
What can you
I can't remember exactly what, Andy Whiteman is your man for land reform.
Andy Whiteman, when I watched Referendum TV before it became Broadcasting Scotland, was on the show during the festival, which was actually next door, and he is I need to get this right, he's either a libertarian municipalist,
right, or
a municipal libertarian.
I'm not sure.
But it's one of the two.
The Common Weal, the idea that we'd be putting forward would be around the idea of land tax. So I'm not sure exactly how you would organise it, but the idea being that most people don't own a lot of land, people with gardens or people in flats don't have any land, and that these massive estates, some of which haven't changed hands since the time of Queen Victoria, so they're never on the market, there's never an opportunity for people to buy them and break them up, that if they're not productive, they would end up getting hit with a bit of tax, which would mean they were more likely to go on the market, they were more likely to be used for productive use, and that's what we should be aiming for in Scotland.
One of the interesting things in terms of the Treaty of Union and the backers for the Better Together campaign, some of them were from the same dukedoms.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. I'm not sure about, I think it maybe was the Duke of Buccleuch who contributed.
A very big landowner in the borders where I live, yeah.
So was that vested class interest at work?
Definitely, yeah.
I was setting you up an open goal that you could score it. I mean, I kind of knew the answer there. I suppose the question is, though, again, how does that appeal to people in the middle, the people who chose to vote no on this occasion?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a political strategist. I kind of feel like maybe, I know it's base, but possibly we needed to maybe bribe people. If we're saying the pensioners swung it, now we know probably now that they felt they had a stronger sense of Britishness than possibly the younger generation had. So that's an issue which maybe isn't addressable through financial incentives. But it's possible that we could have said, we'll take this money, we'll set this money aside, therefore your pension will not only be protected and fine and going forward, but did you know you've got the lowest pension in Europe? Oh, you didn't. Did you know that Ireland get 160 a week? Well, how would you like to get 160? Something like that.
Right.
Possibly we could have chipped through the mainstream media malaise, and that message maybe could have got through, and maybe that would have helped. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a way to deal with a critical issue. Coming to the issue of Britishness, you yourself are built in Britishness in terms of your identity, spending so long down in.
Yes.
Was it Devon or Dorset?
Devon. Yeah. I actually, when I moved back to Scotland, and when you move to somewhere, you always thought that I always had a strong sense of Scottish identity. When I lived in London and so on, I would always say to people, where are you from? And I'd say, well, Devon, but I am Scottish, and I would always was definitely part of my identity. But coming back to Scotland, having been away for so long, I didn't feel Scottish. And I felt actually at that point I was British. That was this idea. I know it's kind of an abstract, it's a construct, isn't it, this idea
Yes.
of Britishness. But I felt that because I'd lived all over, that kind of fitted me, and it seemed like the right thing. But having read around so much about, maybe a bit more about Scottish history, and certainly, the sort of reawakening of the Scottish political scene, and learning a bit more about Scottish culture, and through reading about the politics, how this culture and the Scottish self-identity and everything was intertwined, and how it had all kind of developed, made me sort of reject that idea of being British. And I decided that, you choose your own identity, don't you?
Yeah, you construct it for yourself.
And so I decided I was going to reject this idea of Britishness, and that I would, self-identify, I am Scottish, and I kind of went with that and grasped it. In fact, I would say I've been radicalised by the journey that I've been on, in these last 2 years. So, as I'm sure many people have as well.
Yeah, I mean, some of us were radicals before that, some of us were activists before that. I wasn't, but some others were. This has been a radicalising, activating campaign for me.
Definitely.
And one that won't see backsliding. I want independence, and I want it because it's not Westminster, it's one of the biggest ones. Listen, thank you very much for your time today. It seems as if you've been bouncing about all over the place in terms of the Common Weal hat, the Women for Indy hat. So you may have a wee rest, and then get back in amongst it. I wish you the very, very best to do that. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much from Referendum TV, as it's now fully called Broadcasting Scotland. We'll be back with you soon. Thank you.